Good evening. Welcome to the March 11th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge. Alrighty. Any announcements? Trustee Lopez, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so I'm proud to announce that I have launched a podcast. It is a podcast on local government doings, all kinds of things. It is already the #1 podcast in Northern Westchester politics. It's the only podcast on Northern Westchester politics.
You got your own category.
But I've cornered the market. So if you are doing your dishes at the gym, walking your dog, and looking for about 40 minutes to kill on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, you can find my podcast. It is called Omar Lopez Talks to the People. And I'm going to have my first guest. So the first one was just a solo one where I answered questions that folks sent in. But my first guest is going to be Village Manager Karen DeTore. Very excited about that. And so
So am I.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And so look out for that. That's it.
Anyone else with announcements? Manny? Rika? We're going to get an update from the manager and some of our department heads on the ever-evolving topic of coronavirus and how we're addressing that in the village. But I also wanted to say congratulations to Kemi Pogue and the folks at Westcott for the ribbon cutting. A number of us were at this morning at the CAP office down at the old Washington School. They've been doing great work, and today was our official kickoff and celebration of with all the work that they're doing there. Everybody's getting emails on a hourly basis of things being canceled. So I'll just add to your list. The Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series screening that had been planned for next week is being postponed, and it will become our May 21st screening. The film is Knock Down the House. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists. It's going to be a really great film. So hopefully by, sometime later this spring, we'll be in a different mindset and a different place as far as gatherings are concerned. So with that, why don't we turn it over to Village Manager Karen DeTore.
Thank you so much, Mayor. So we have had a busy few weeks here. I want to be able to give this update, keeping in mind that information on the virus is changing moment by moment, but as it's changing locally, at the county level, at the state level, at the national level, and the global level, more and more practices are emerging, and we're able to learn from them, share information with each other, and to that end, we have calls Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with Westchester County. The village and town will be meeting starting this past Monday, every Monday at 2 p.m. And as necessary. And then we also have weekly calls with Bond, Shonik, and King Labor Council on Tuesdays at 12 o'clock to discuss some of the labor-related issues that are involved in the virus, such as any sick time changes or how issues about quarantining and employees and keeping employees safe. And our Director of Personnel, Steve Sage, will be talking about some of the policies that we're implementing. We actually are being as proactive as humanly possible. So we're working on prioritizing, of course, safety, mitigating cost implications, and ensuring continuation of essential services. And we're putting policies in place and capacity in that regard, which you'll hear more from each of our department heads. But we are looking at things on working remotely, the policies, the capacity to do so. We're looking at identifying third-party vendors for some of our essential services in the event that we should need them. Our water treatment plant, we're required by the Department of Health to have a plan in place for that, but we were already working on that, so I believe that we're in good shape in that regard. And also things like payroll, making sure everybody's signed up for direct deposit is just one small way that we can ease things should there be a need to quarantine anybody here, close any buildings. So we're doing a bunch of things. So I think it's best, though, if the department heads speak directly about what they're doing specifically, and then they can obviously ask any questions. And I think we'll start on this side of the room and move down. So Bill, maybe you want to start and talk about, I know we've had some changes with our senior program. We are working very closely with the town on everything as well, so I think our recreation superintendent, Bill Garrison, can give us
good
the
evening.
update there.
So at the community center, we've done some enhanced cleaning of the areas that are most touched, doorknobs, bathrooms. We've added some more cleaning for the locker rooms, the pool locker rooms. We are not canceling any programs. All of our programs are still running. We're getting lots of calls from folks asking if this particular program is going, but right now all of our programs are running. The town nutrition senior program, they're having their last day tomorrow. So that program will not be at the community center after tomorrow afternoon. We have a special event that was from an outside group that was going to be doing a youth forum on March 21st. That's been canceled. We've had a number of people who have reserved rooms at the community center, and they've self-canceled. So we have that's going on. People are just calling a lot, and we're just reaffirming them that we are continuing business as usual. We have lots of signs up throughout the community center reminding people to do the hand washing, and to, if you're sick, please don't come into our building. And that's about what we're doing right now. It's just and people seem to be okay with it. There's no people being mass hysteria or anything about it. Everyone's really good with it, and programs are going on as usual.
Does anybody have any questions?
All the athletic equipment, how are you cleaning all of that stuff? The basketballs and all that stuff?
Well, I mean, everything's getting wiped down, and that's what we can do. The mats, like the athletic mats, the equipment. We're even in the arts and crafts areas, taking those and trying to do what we can to wipe those areas down with the disinfectant the best that we can.
So right now, we are following, there are no definitive guidelines on closing canceling events or closing things, as I think everybody knows. Obviously, anything that would put vulnerable populations, seniors at risk, we're really focusing on. The considerations to close programming at the rec center, much of the programming is youth-focused, and the schools are still open. So we do run an after-school program that's valuable to parents. So we're working closely with the school district, too, as they identify what their plans are. For a lot of things at the rec center, I think that we're going to coordinate with the school district as well.
So just to be clear, in other communities, when the schools close down, and it has to be the full district, so in some districts, it's only some of the schools, is the protocol going to be that the community center is going to be closed?
I think
I mean,
that,
I'm hearing the cleaning part, and I understand, but
yeah, I think that.
what is the protocol going forward?
Well, I think that we are developing protocols. So I think that we would my orientation is to be more conservative than not. So we're looking into the implications of closing our programs, how we would manage that, how we would deal with programs that might be in midstream. But again, unfortunately, the protocols aren't as clear as we would like, but we would, it would be my intent to recommend as conservative an option as possible.
Any other questions for Bill? I see we have a room full of department heads, so
Thank you,
whoever's
Bill.
next?
Thank you, Bill.
I'd like to introduce Steve Sage, our Director of Human Resources.
Raise that mic over there.
Yeah,
Good luck.
Should have been last.
I'm sure everybody can hear, right?
Absolutely.
It's for the people at home, it's not for
Gotcha,
us. That's why
gotcha,
you're
gotcha,
there.
gotcha.
Tom says all good.
I took some notes. I just broke things down into some of the precautions we're taking, some of the actions we're taking, and some of the other things I'm considering in these actions. Precautions, we are doing extra cleaning of all of our facilities. That's for our employees as well as the general public. That's been highlighted by John Heitman and his work, as well as Andy and Paul. John Heitman had the foresight to buy a tremendous amount of hand sanitizer, so we have that available to the public as well as our employees. We have post notices on all of our front doors, thanks to Maddie, who was foresight for that. We're also signing up anybody who comes into our offices so that in the event of an outbreak or contamination, we know who to contact. And we are setting up a flu clinic. That was a CDC recommendation. We had one at the end of last year, but we'll do another one for all of our employees, likely next Tuesday. Some of the actions we're taking, Craig and Christina had been working on setting up every single employee with an email. That way, in case of an emergency, we have a way to contact every single one of our employees. Maddie and Jamie had worked to set up a website for the village so that we can communicate with the public, but as well as with our employees about the actions that the village is taking. We are preparing a work from home program in the event that we have to shut down a building, and anybody who has the ability to work from home can. Again, that is with our IT department to make sure that everybody has that ability. We are writing a special sick leave policy so that anybody who wants to self-quarantine, anybody who has an underlying health condition, anybody who has a mandatory quarantine by the state, we're writing provisions for those situations. Tom, Maddie, and Dale worked on making sure that all of our employees are set up on direct deposit. Again, in case this building closes or one of our office closes, we don't have to worry about our employees being paid. We are in the midst of creating a action poster for our employees that's outlining some of the things that the village is doing, as well as some of the things like the flu clinic, so that they know those things are available. Stuart was looking into an insurance policy for business interruption and making sure that any of our employees, any of the lost wages, stuff like that, that we have to pay the employees in case of a closure. Unfortunately, those things are long gone. There's been a stop on all of those kind of products. A couple of other things that we looked into was how will this affect our workers' comp coverage and who is available for such an instance, how this will play into FMLA coverage, and if somebody who is quarantined or if somebody comes down to it, how comes down with the virus, how will that play into our FMLA coverage. With some of our insurance products, we are self-insured, so we were looking into a critical illness coverage. Again, unfortunately, a lot of these policies write out COVID-19, so we don't have those policies available, but we are looking to see if there are any other policies available. We're looking into a telehealth benefit so that people can have the ability to speak with the doctor over the phone or over video conference instead of having to go into a facility. New York State recently had a directive where they waived the fees associated with COVID-19 testing or any kind of coverage that's any kind of benefit that's received as a result of it. Those do not apply to self-funded programs like we are, but we are working with United, who's our TPA, to make sure that we can also extend those benefits to our employees. Some of the things that I was considering, it's the short term versus the long term. Any kind of action we take, is generally under short-term consideration, but we have to acknowledge that this might not be short-term, it might be long-term. And that goes with any kind of canceled event or any kind of the special precautions that we're taking. And then another issue that I'm working with and trying to figure out is how we're going to handle any kind of voluntary travel to places that are restricted or that have travel restrictions. A lot of our benefits, like our sick policy, is for anybody who, unfortunately may have contact with somebody, unknowingly has contact with somebody, but there's a difference between somebody who knowingly travels to a country that is restricted and how we will extend those benefits to them.
Hadn't thought about that one. Flying to Texas next month. It's not restricted yet, is
I
it?
think you'll be okay. from Westchester, Texas.
It is Texas. I wanted to ask you, just for, I realize that things are evolving, so we had a conversation 2 days ago, and things could be totally different recommendations. But if someone, could you tell us a little more about when people are being advised, if they think they should self-quarantine, when does that really make sense? Should they call their doctor? Should they go to a hospital? I
Correct.
know the answer to some of these, but could you
Yeah,
tell
I
me what the
gotcha.
protocols are?
I think anybody who's experiencing symptoms that are associated with the virus should be contacting their doctor and having their doctor make a determination on whether that person needs to come in for further testing to eliminate some things like the flu or any other virus. And the doctor should be coordinating with the state on anybody he thinks is at he or she thinks is at risk of having the virus. A quarantine order for self-quarantine is really sort of like a misnomer. I don't think anybody should be self-quarantined. Yes, they should be quarantined at the direction of a doctor, and that doctor, if they're quarantined, should be communicating with the state to make sure that that is the proper procedure for that person. There's a difference between quarantine
Yep,
when the state
exactly.
mandates that you're quarantined, because they have reason to believe that you had direct contact with somebody who also has the virus.
But the quarantines are specifically to medical practitioners actually putting in writing. So many of the cases running around the county are a husband coming home because he works in a medical facility. And it's just, this is a particular case, it's not a gender-specific thing. The wife and children were not quarantined. There's no, and so to say that they are is actually their own decision. It's actually not how the quarantines are working right now.
Okay.
So I think there has to be protocols that are very specific to a note, it's you, the fact that it's a spouse, because the way it's being done around this county and in the state of New York, let alone in other states, because it's being driven state by state. So Connecticut's health department has had very different assignments to quarantines than New York State has. And people who commute from Connecticut or New Jersey should also be aware of that. So forget Texas. It's like, are you commuting from, New Jersey to your job here? It really has to be a medical practitioner. I mean, so you're going to have protocols, I assume, somewhere?
I wrote
Because,
a proposal for our sick
Okay.
policy, and that sick policy does include documentation by a doctor that thinks that you may be at risk to spread it or potentially have it, and that they're advising you to stay home.
That was a long list. Thank you,
Sorry.
Steve. No,
No.
don't apologize.
No.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to be as thorough as possible.
Great.
We've sat in on a bunch of webinars, telecasts for things, and a lot of interesting topics come up. And that's our way to realize, oh, we need to be prepared for that as well, and we should be looking into that as well. And
Yeah.
so,
One question I have is that many of our workers are unionized. Is there any consideration with how we roll out any of this with respect to union contract?
to some degree, yes. The sick policy that we're working on is actually a benefit to the employees, regardless of whether they are part of a union or not. I would assume that the union would be very willing to participate in something like this because it is extending the benefit to them. And the reality of the situation is the sick policy that we're proposing for this special situation is really to make sure that people who are feeling under the weather or feel like they are at risk, that they're staying home. And so we're sort of, I don't want to say incentivizing that, but we're making sure that they're realizing that there's not going to be a penalty for keeping the greater population safe. And so I don't think that we would have any fight from the union about rolling out what we would pose as an extra benefit.
Could you also consider a manpower protocol? So if Bill's staff all call because they're feeling under the weather, they've got all the symptoms, or they might have actually family members they have to take care of, there has to be a minimum number of people to open different parts and different facilities. If you don't have anybody to open up and be a lifeguard, you really can't run the pool, right? So I assume you might be, where I work, that's actually our biggest challenge. And then comes overtime costs, because people have to cover for others. And if this goes on for more than 30 days, most contracts don't exceed 2 weeks, actually. So there's like a rolling thing,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
It's-
Well, that's one of the
it's
things
like-
that I said that we have to consider as short-term versus long-term. and-
that's what you were
ma'am.
defining.
Yes, ma'am.
Fabulous. Now I understand what that meant. Thank you.
And then the
Great.
case if we have a whole building full of employees who are having symptoms, I'd probably be on the phone with the state and getting them down here to do some more disease detecting.
Anybody else have other questions for Steve? I have other questions, but I see that Chief Francoso is here, so I'll save some for him.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Steve.
Thank you.
Our Superintendent of Water, Andy Teese.
I have to lower this down, though.
Yes. Along with the rest of the
Good
line.
evening, everybody. Everybody's talked about cleaning, and we went a little farther than what was talked about. OVAC was generous enough to lend us a misting machine, in which you use for sanitizing anything. It's basically hypochlorous acid, which is 80 times stronger than bleach, that we've gone through all the bathrooms and offices that brings it to the next level. And so that's been done already. And then obviously we've stepped up all the buildings where we're cleaning bathrooms twice a day and wiping everything down constantly. On the cleaning side, that's it for me. On the water filtration plant side, obviously the health department wants a plan, and we've broken the filter plant up into individual shifts so that there's not so many people working together, including myself, which I'll be put on a shift if it gets to that level. And we have 7 certified people to operate the facility. We'd probably bring in laborers to help to fill up day crocs so that we can use just normal manpower to work with the operators. The health department's biggest concern is making sure that disinfection is there in this situation, and we've come up with backup plans where we've topped off all of our chemicals for the next 2 months. It's a little bit more on the delivery side, but instead of ordering 3 2-ton cylinders worth of pure chlorine, we order 1 each month instead of waiting 3 months, so we're topped off. We're worried about trucking, if trucking's going to get there or not. So that we're in a good position with that. Keeping our tanks topped off so that it's there. It's like an insurance policy. That's kind of it. Any questions?
The water is safe.
Water is safe.
Thank you.
And the water's getting better every day. That new system's
is.
working great.
Yeah.
Today we've increased the blending because our reservoir is only like 1.2 foot down of being full. So we went from 100% New York City to 70% New York City, 30% us. So it will get even better.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Good news. Thank you. It's nice to hear about something other than coronavirus, too. Thanks for that.
From one thing to the next.
I'd like to introduce our village engineer, Paul Fraioli.
Good evening, Mayor and Board. Thank you, Manager Torrey. So building on some more public works items that Andy started to discuss. As you know, much of the public services that DPW offers are happen automatically, and a lot of them are monitored through SCADA systems, your water service, your sanitary sewer, and your road is your road. So much of the work in the event of a quarantine or a stoppage of work out of the DPW would have to fall into the hands of somebody else. So in that regard, a lot of our proactive efforts where we'll go out and do an improvement project or a road improvement project or a drainage improvement project will obviously be put on the back burner, and we will become basically a reactive or responsive type entity and handling only the when and if type work. And that will be done also, as you know, through our, in large part by our annual bid contracts. A lot of the work that we would have to cover in the event we did not have a DPW workforce could be handled by our annual bid contracts. Some of it cannot. The village bids and maintains that list for a myriad of services and materials, and you get those POs put in front of you in the form of the voucher detail every meeting. but one of the main ones that Manager Zatori asked that I look a little further into in the event would be sanitation collection, because if we lost our services through the workforce there, we obviously would not tell people to store in place, because that could cause a whole nother level of health hazards on top of what we would already be going through. So to build on that, I met with an area container carting service to kind of get an idea of what it would take and start to formulate a contract. It's still very much in a draft form, and I'm not sure what level of detail we're going to take it to, because there's going to be so many variables associated with that. But essentially, just to help folks get their arms around what we're talking about, I pulled up some numbers for everybody's information from the 2018 and the 2019 filings that we make every year with the county Department of Environmental Facilities Solid Waste Division. Every year we take over 9,000 tons of household waste only to Charles Point for its reuse there as a waste to energy facility. We take over 1,000 tons of paper and cardboard up to the transfer facility in Cortland, and then that same transfer facility also takes over 600 tons on average every year of commingled from the village of Ossining, and we actually collect a total solid waste of over 25,000 tons that's generated from the village, either from our operation, but in large part from our commercial and residential customers. As a little digression, not to do with the response to coronavirus, we are averaging over 65% of that material being recycled for beneficial reuse. So that's a little PSA I snuck into this presentation, but that's a good thing, and like to ask the residents and the commercial customers to keep up that good work of source separation, because it pays dividends to the village and also is good for the environment. Back on track. So we met, and I think with some coordination with Tom Warren in his office, the tipping fees are obviously still going to be there, regardless of who collects it at Charles Point, and we have money set aside for that already. So essentially, the work product in this draft contract consists of the usage of their vehicles and their manpower. The only thing that I would probably pull out of the existing service is green waste, because that is something that doesn't necessarily have to be done in the event of emergency. You don't have to do your yard waste. Maybe you don't have to do your tree work unless it got to a point where there was a storm and there was a lot of organic waste that we would have to address. We would put that back on the table. But right now it consists of household waste, bulk trash, and recyclables, which we also don't want people to hold for too long, because you can have issues with that relative to fire safety and what have you. That's that, and we obviously don't have any druthers that happens, but we are prepared if it does. Any questions with regard to Public Works? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Nick Franzoso, Chief of our Ossining Volunteer Ambulance Corps.
Good evening. And as a quick update, OVAC is prepared for infectious disease, something we handle on a regular basis, flu, norovirus, all these things. As Andy mentioned before, we do have a sanitized system that we have in our building. We produce the chemicals ourselves. It's made from water and salt. The byproduct is hypochlorous acid and another cleaning agent, which is eco-friendly. It's safe for the environment, safe for health reasons for us to spray. We do have electrostatic sprayers that we use in our trucks twice a day, plus after any call where there's an infectious disease that could possibly be transmitted. We do have a supply of masks, gowns, glasses, and stuff like that for our own personal protection. We're obviously being very cautious about overuse just because supplies are tight. All of our vendors are already on back order for at least 3 to 4 months, so we're cautiously looking at utilizing the supplies we have when we need them. But that's basically all I have because we are prepared. We do have staff still 24/7, 2 ambulances plus a fly car, plus additional support as needed. As long as our providers are wearing the personal protective equipment, there is no cause for concern for us to contract a disease and to spread it to anybody else, as long as we're following the practices that we have in place. So,
And I'm just hoping that you have some insights, because you spend time with the medical profession more than most of us, about the availability of testing in our area. Are you aware of it happening? And part two would be, there's stories that there might be a vaccine someday, 1 month, 2 month, 1 year. Do you know anything?
so obviously there's a lot of FDA regulations that go with vaccines. They probably will have something that will work on the short term, but then it has to go through all of its approval processes, which would take much longer. I'm sure if they do find something that will work, they will push the processes through to make it readily available. I do know that Northwell Health is now doing automated testing as of yesterday, so they are able to do that locally.
Phelps
So
then?
it's through Phelps, but I don't think it's at their location. But Phelps does have access to that. I'm sure everyone saw on the news, Phelps did have a case. Somebody walked into their ER. They were completely on top of it from the moment they walked through the front doors, putting somebody in a mask, moving them to an isolation room, and then treating that patient. Just based on some of the conversations I've had with the hospital, all of their staff wore the appropriate PPE, personal protective equipment, followed all their protocols, and nobody from that interaction was quarantined or asked to self-quarantine or anything like that. So, I mean, as long as we're following the guidelines that the CDC puts in place, which we are, organizations like Phelps and Northwell are doing that as well. That's one of the benefits of having Northwell in our area. They're a much larger system, so Phelps was a community hospital. Now that they have this huge network to draw from and to get resources from, it's definitely a benefit to our community. But
Thank you for that reassuring report. Does anybody else have any questions for Chief Francoso while he's here? Thanks.
Next, I'd like to call up our treasurer, Tom Warren. In addition to essential services as water and sanitation, we also have administrative services that are essential, and we do want to make sure, to the degree possible, that we are planning for any additional costs or potential loss of revenue as a result of the virus. We're tracking it to make sure that we have those numbers should there be any reimbursement from the state, but I would like our treasurer to give us a little bit more information about what we're doing on the finance and administrative end for preparation.
Well, thank you, and good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees. As has been mentioned twice, the first thing that we did was send out the memo to the departments asking them to reach out to their employees to encourage everybody to sign up for direct deposit because a few of us in the finance department have laptops and the ability to log in remotely to our accounting system, and we can process the payroll from off-site. We can create the direct deposit files to send to the banks to pay the employees. If this building were shuttered, we would not be able to print checks, and that's why we wanted to encourage everybody to make sure that they did sign up for direct deposit. I did check with Craig Cooper, and he said that if by chance the operations center is open but this building is closed, we could move one of our printers and the other equipment up to the operations center to allow us to print checks from up there if we had to. But you know, because of the remote access, we can keep up with all of our regular accounting functions on a limited basis because there's only a couple of us that have the laptops. We had never anticipated that our rank and file employees would be working from home, and they don't have the equipment, and we haven't asked for the equipment for them. We've discussed it, and we felt that we could probably handle it with our current computer access. And we also have the ability to remotely log in and do our online banking to allow us to make the transfers, and to also pay some of our important vendors, like, we still need to make our bond payments. So we have that ability, and we make our bond payments electronically anyway through the banking system instead of issuing checks. So that would be able to continue as well. Currently, we're not actively collecting property taxes, but people can still log on through the village website to pay their taxes if need be. And if this continues, into July, we'll be able to continue to collect property taxes online in July. For water payments, we have the lockbox. We don't currently have the ability to take payments through the village's website because of the KVS accounting system. That will undoubtedly change once we have Edmunds online. And we have talked about the possibility that if this building is shuttered, but we do have the operations center, we would be able to hopefully take payments up there at the operations center. And as far as the financial impact on the village budget, we haven't really talked a lot about that. There's so many unknowns, but we do have a healthy fund balance, and that's something that we can discuss in the future.
Thank you, Tom.
Future arrived, I think, today. So the stock market is now at the 2009 recession cycle. So I think we're going to have to start looking at the effect. The conversation so far has been about protocols for village employees and village buildings being shuttered, although arguably buildings don't actually pass the virus per se, people do. So you could have an employee here, if they're the only employee, as long as the place is cleaned. It's not like your Walmart, this is not your brick and mortar place. I think, so I have to look, but I'm actually concerned about the people who live in this village. And so one of the things that happened the last time something of this magnitude happens, whether it was 9/11 or other things, is there's usually an analysis that approximately every 100 points in the stock market causes an equal effect on people's incomes. At 1,000 points, so we're down now to 2009, I think we're going to have to start looking, if this goes past 30 days, the effect it has on people's ability to pay things, people's ability to pay their taxes, and people's ability to contribute to all the non-for-profits, because there's a domino effect on our ability to keep asking people for more money. And so it would be a great exercise. I'm hoping this is gone in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But as Steve said, if it's a long-term issue, it isn't just about the people who work for the village, which is the responsibility here for the village manager. But we had a pretty tremendous effect on lots of different things in this village, on the economy, because people simply couldn't afford certain things. So we're going to probably have to start not being surprised a month from now and say we didn't predict it, because we should be able to predict it. And, where we are financially, who we pay, how we pay, and how we collect, it has to all be a part of the equation, because we are also collectors of revenues, not just distributors of payments to vendors, and what the cash flow looks like and things like that. So I'd be interested in that in a couple of weeks. So I would ask, I'm sure you're giving it some thought now, but I'd be really interested. When there was a recession in this economy, I was not a trustee or involved in any municipal issues. I was just your average everyday commuter talking about it. So I don't even know what to ask for. I just know that this is something we should be thinking about.
So again, we're starting to look into long and short-term implications. Were we to close down the rec center and cancel programming, what it would look like, even if we had to, in a hopefully very worst-case scenario, cancel summer camp. So we can look at those things more concretely.
Right.
I think that I was not here in 2008 either, but I'm sure that we have data that we can go back to make develop some sort of analysis and anticipation. Also, we are in the same boat with every other municipality in the state, so that is the conversations, and there have been many, I neglected to mention too that we had conversations with the federal government this week too. Has really been focused on what we can do to halt infection or to make sure that people are well, and what we do if people are quarantined. I think that the next discussion will be on economic factors and fiscal sustainability, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Craig, do you want to talk? I'd like to call up our Director of IT, Craig Cooper. He will talk about some of the things we're doing to ensure remote access, and also to be able to communicate with all of our employees as effectively as possible. So,
Good evening, all. As already been mentioned, we've expanded our email system to include every single employee in the village. So this is another means of communication that we can use for them. Their email can be accessed through cell phone, tablets, or kiosks that we have at the rec center or at the highway garage. I've also expanded our remote access situation. In the past, we've had a few people logging in remotely, finance, Stewart, etc. Now it's expanded to anybody that really needs it. It's just a matter of what kind of equipment they have at their own home. Okay? Remotely, they can use a tablet, a phone, anything. A computer is always best. It's an extremely secure situation. With the SCADA situation, I use a software VPN as well as a remote LogMeIn program. And with everything else, we use LogMeIn, which is a 256-bit encrypted system, and I have no problems with it at all. I get automatic alerts if people try to log into it, if they fail or if they're successful. So I'm always monitoring it. I think we're in good shape.
Thank you, Big Brother.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you speak a little, and this may seem a little off topic, but I promise it's connected, is about ransomware? What the village's current thinking is, what your current thinking is about ransomware, particularly if we're in a situation where we're short-staffed or compromised, and then you get something additional like ransomware hitting the village. Curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Well, any ransomware is brought in from someone accessing a bad website or a piece of email. My feeling is we would never pay a ransom. We always have backups. We had a major disaster last October, 2 years ago October, where the system was brought down by a ransomware. The KVS system was up and running in 1 day. Payroll was operational. The Munis system took about a week. And it was not our fault. That's their situation. But we didn't have to pay anything, and everything was up and running. So
Thank you.
you never want to pay ransom. But even if you paid a ransom, you're not guaranteed you're going to get your data back.
Right. Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Craig? Thank you.
thank you, Craig. Next, I'd like to have our Chief of Police, Kevin Sylvester.
Evening, Chief.
Good evening. For the police department, really, we're operations as normal. We did just finish infectious disease and PPE training last month, which was as scheduled and just conveniently rolled out. I know Captain Giorgio was going to be speaking with OVAC about the ability to disinfect cars if that became something. So he had talked last week about having the ability to spray down things. That's something we hadn't had before. Other than that, we rely on DPW for cleaning, and our officers are going to great lengths to try and keep their workspaces clean as they go. In terms of staffing, we have a continuation of a continuity of operations plan that's in place, which is required by New York State for accreditation purposes. So irrespective of staffing and building issues, the police department will be here.
Any other questions for Chief Sylvester? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. So thank you, everybody, for the update. We are learning from other communities, and again, having regular calls is ultimately a good thing. And so some other things that we're doing is we've put a lot of signage out that you've probably seen. We're trying to do a lot of as reaching in as many people with the messages that are coming from the CDC. So our homepage on the website now has links to fact sheets and up-to-the-minute information. We're pushing it out as much as we can. we're working with our other community partners, Open Door Family Health Centers. Tomorrow morning, we'll be meeting here in this room with the faith-based communities to talk about, they have a lot of questions, so talking to them, and then also seeing how maybe their services can be leveraged to get the get more word out to the community, and also, anticipate needs that people who are hard to reach may have, and being able to get to stores or food or whatever it is. We met with the school district this week, so we really are trying to keep as on top of it as we possibly can. One of the other municipal officers suggested they're keeping sign-in sheets in all their departments. So when people come in to pay a water bill, their taxes, fill out a building permit, they're keeping a record of everybody who's there. So in the event that, something's happened, it would really, in this case, probably be something with the staff that there would be a list that then could be used to contact people. Small things like that are helpful to us feeling like, we're all in this together and working. It is a little bit frustrating because a lot of, somebody asked that county executive today on the call, when is this going to be over? And nobody knows. So
He's a smart guy, but he didn't know the answer to that question.
no,
did he?
he there, and that's a frustrating situation to be in and somewhat unprecedented. But it is good to know that we're working with a wide team of people who are concerned and committed and going to make sure that we get through this in the best way possible.
Does anybody else have any questions on this? I know it's consuming an awful lot of our time and thoughts in our personal lives, and I'm so grateful to our staff for thinking about it through the lens that you are, not just your own families, but for our whole community. I know that a lot of time and thought has been dedicated to it by our staff, and it's probably, I know it's not on the list of priorities of things you plan to be doing this March, and you're making time for it. And amazingly, we still have other things to talk about later. But is there anything on this topic before we transition? All right, well, thank you, everybody, for being here and for updating us. And I know that if we have any questions or thoughts, we can always email Karen or the staff tomorrow. Is there anything that you wanted to, that you forgot to mention before you go and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening? Thank you. Not that you have to go, just you don't have to stay.
I also
None of them are staying. I'm sort of surprised.
well,
Chief DeCruz is stuck, though.
well, I saved Chief DeCruz for last, but he can. Chief DeCruz can also provide some input and.
Chief?
Okay, so
She was
I'd like
giving
to
you like 3 hints.
introduce Chief DeCruz of the Ossining Fire Department to, and anything else he might like to add.
Well, I'll give you my update for the COVID-19 crisis.
And then also a more general update. So
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you,
So
Chief
the
DeCruz.
fire department's going to continue to operate as normal. We're just going to make a few changes. We're going to limit the members' interactions with the public while we're at calls. And we're also going to limit the number of members entering mostly residences, as long as it doesn't affect our operation. So it depends on what we were dispatched for and what we see when we get on location there. If it comes to the point where we become limited on personnel, we will start staffing the firehouses and move them in shifts. And if it gets really bad and we require any further assistance, we can utilize the mutual aid agreement that we have with the Westchester County Department of Emergency Services. So it's pretty much business as usual on our end for that.
Thank you.
I just have a question. I forgot to ask this when everybody was here, Karen. So just so we know, every community sort of, like Latimer is for the county. Are you like the emergency, like there's a title, like the person who actually
I'm
at some
the-
point has to
the-
make a
the
decision?
Chair of the Office of Emergency Management, which encompasses the town and village department heads.
Okay.
OVAC, Ossining Fire Department, and, but we do work very much as a team, so.
So there's sort of like a task force, you're getting together, you have an agreement of when a decision has to be made, if there's, because at some point, somebody may say, we should close this, we shouldn't close. So you guys are working as a team, and you're the honored chair
Right.
to make the decision that you then inform the community.
Yes, so
Okay,
and
that's
then-
great.
Then even in times of non-emergency, the Office of Emergency Management meets monthly.
Right.
The mayor and the supervisor attend. We also, our meeting on Mondays now is essentially the Office of Emergency Management, and we've added some people to that too. So
Great.
it's we've enriched that pool, and we are in contact on an ongoing basis, discussing,
Great.
next steps and plans. And then, were you gonna?
Yeah,
talk
I
a
got a
little
little,
bit?
I got a little, I'm done with my COVID-19, so.
Okay.
I'll give you a little quick update. So 2009, we finished the year with 636 calls. We had 5 major fires. We spent a total of 6,738 hours and 14 minutes on the fire scene. And 2019 total training hours was 2,416 hours and 25 minutes for our members. And we added 11 new members to the department, 2019. Moving on to 2020. We currently have 457 members in the department. We've added 3 members this year. Our calls year to date are 98. Engine 98, Ossining Steamer Company, put their new engine into service last month. We have another one coming in May. Engine 96 Ossining Hose, it's in the process of being built now. The scheduled delivery date will be here in May. And let's see, department inspection for us is scheduled for June 27th.
Oh, what? Hold on.
I'll send you a letter.
Oh, okay, every year I get the letter.
June
I
27th.
always get it late.
It's good to put in your calendar. so you
Okay,
can-
I'm putting it in now. Give me the date
That one
again.
right now is
June,
still,
Saturday,
still
June
on.
27th.
We haven't started canceling our June events yet?
No, let's be optimistic. June 27th.
Start planning
And
it.
usually what time is it? I'm putting it in
It's
now.
6 o'clock.
Okay. Don't want to miss that.
This is the Ossining.
Ah, yes.
Cocktails start at 5 as usual.
So it's,
5:36, I'm not sure yet.
I'm going by
Tuesday.
last year.
Yeah,
all
si-
the,
so probably 5, 6 o'clock we're gonna do the inspection, or 6:30, I don't know. Somewhere around there.
Looking forward to it.
Yep.
Looking
And-
forward to events one day.
Okay. And then also this year, we are hosting the 114th Annual Westchester County Volunteer Firemen's Association Convention, which is being held Sunday, September 17th through Saturday, the 19th. So there's gonna be a lot of fire personnel from all over the county in Ossining for those 3 days.
When was the last time we hosted that?
2008.
Wow, okay.
2008. So,
And in conjunction with that, we're having the fire parade at a different time than usual, correct?
yeah, so the parade concludes the convention, which is Saturday the 19th, 3 o'clock. But Thursday, we have to put on a training seminar and we do a memorial service for the county.
Is all this stuff open to the public or is this just
No, all fire personnel.
fire personnel?
So we put
Okay,
on a training
all right.
seminar for fire personnel for the county. We do a
Got it.
memorial service, Friendship Night Friday. They have their annual meeting.
Okay.
And parade Saturday. And just so you know, I don't know if you know, your fellow trustee, Robert Fritchie, will be sworn in as president of this organization during that convention.
You guys definitely have to let us know.
So other than that, that's all I have.
I actually neglected to say in the opening remarks, thank you for mentioning Bob. And I didn't say anything last week because I'm always sensitive to not talk about people's personal lives on television, but I got clearance to say our thoughts are with Bob. He had planned surgery last week. He is home recovering. Looking forward to some physical therapy, and we've talked on the phone a few times. He's happy to be home. He's doing well, and we look forward to having him back at the table when he's up for it. Any questions for
I just
Chief Jones?
had a couple questions. So 11 new members. As you know, most places are dying and putting up signs and neon lights trying to get members. So congratulations. So where are we, like number-wise? How many members do we have in Ossining?
457.
400. Is that you? Oh, I thought you might have to answer it.
I would
That's why I
do it.
was waiting.
Give me a second.
Sure.
We have a first assistant chief. There we go. Yep. Cedar Manor.
How did you hear that? That's good. I'm always wondering if it's where my father is. Okay, so 400,
Right now, 457.
okay. And are you the largest volunteer in New York State?
One of the largest in New York State, correct.
Bigger.
There are some bigger departments down in Long Island.
You know, forget Long Island.
With Long Island.
Okay, well, great, thank you.
Any other questions for Chief DeCruz while he's here?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Chief.
much.
See, oh, that's all they need.
Okay.
Right.
So next up, we had, again, when we were at the reorganization meeting in January, we had wanted to give more consideration to the expense reimbursement policy. And we would like to talk about that now. So I'm going to turn this over to Corporation Counsel Kahan to talk about our business expense reimbursement policy.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Oh, I didn't print it out again.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. I had forwarded last week a memorandum regarding the reimbursement policy that had been proposed by the village treasurer and myself, as well as the revision to the policy that was presented by the board. Some of my views with regard to the what would be, let's call it, the policy for public officers and elected officials, and why I felt that having the two separate policies created certain inconsistencies and was really not in line with what I have seen in other municipalities in the state, where it's basically done within one uniform policy. But you know, I, in my memo, laid out a number of issues with regard to that. I hope you've all had a chance to look at it, and I'm open to hear the board's particular views.
Rika, do you want to start it? Kick us off, because you provided some
yeah.
suggested language, and that's where our
So,
starting point was.
Yeah, you had a lot, ooh, sorry. So here's the thing. I think that elected officials, when they're included in the overall policy, isn't actually the way I think of elected officials. Elected officials are overseers of the village with 3 direct reports. It seemed odd when we read it, and I'm speaking, I think, for most people, Bob included, but people will correct me if I'm wrong, that it seemed like we needed to get permission in advance, similar to all the staff from the village manager. So that was one issue, both in principle and in practice, because I don't think that elected officials should need permission from people that report to them on how they spend their money. I don't really have an issue with answering to the public, and the public gets to decide whether they elect officials or not based on how they see them. So from an intent point of view, like from a practice and sort of theory of reporting structure point of view, it seemed odd. Second of all, we're not actually full-time staff reporting to anybody. We actually simply report to the public. So that speaks to the other point. There is an issue in that some municipalities set up budgets for elected officials. We actually don't set a predisposed budget for a mayor or the trustees. Frankly, the reality of it is, well, I don't have like a $300 budget for myself to spend in any way I want to. We have
Not for individuals, but the board absolutely
There's
has a
one for
budget.
the mayor has a line items, and then the trustees have lines.
So
That's a
travel, all that stuff is incorporated in the
And
budget.
so how much is, so Tom, how much is my expenses for dinners and lunches and all that stuff? Not conferences.
And how much is it broken out? Because there are 4 trustees. Is there a lump sum for just anything deemed
It's never been
appropriate for
clear
4
to us, so
people
if
to
that's
share?
there, that's,
So the policy for, there's travel expense. Municipal government works a little bit differently than corporate does on terms of reimbursables for expenses that would traditionally be private sector reimbursables.
no, I wasn't talking about that. I
But-
mean, there are municipalities who have budgets, not corporations, who keep budgets, who assign and approve budgets specific to trustees and to a mayor. We don't do that. I'm not saying we need to do that. I'm simply asking what is the budget for my line item called I meet with people to discuss business issues related to the village.
There's not a specific line item
Okay.
for trustee Levin. There's
Okay.
a budget for the trustees and the contractual expenses. There's one for contractual and board initiatives, $3,000. Office and supplies expense, $1,500, and professional dues and meetings, $8,000. And then the mayor has a budget that includes printing and postage, $250, office and supplies expense, $200, and professional dues and meetings, $2,000.
So, but there's no, when we go out with people,
So
there
that's
isn't a
what-
line item.
That's what I was trying to say. So in municipal government, typically, it's not a travel and entertainment expense the way you would have at even a nonprofit or a corporate. So meals are reimbursed when they are directly related to travel. Meals really are not typically reimbursed, nor is it the intent of the controller's office to reimburse for meals if a meal is your choice to meet at dinner, your choice to meet at lunch. So it does differ for municipality, for government workers, than it does for private sector, which typically would incorporate meal meetings. Those are not best practices, state controller guidelines. Those are not reimbursable in government.
So there are actually local municipalities that do budgets specifically for trustees, and we don't do it, because I think for most of us, we actually don't submit that much. I mean, I may spend a lot of my own money, but I don't submit. But I'm not sure that's a great policy in general. It's not, we found a number of municipalities, honestly.
I'm not sure
so-
that's, I mean, that's based on state controller guidelines, which was how we set so the policies are driven by the board. The board sets the policies, but the
Right.
policies do fall under, ideally, the best practice framework of municipal spending. So those are based on best practice guidelines. I can't speak to what other municipalities do. That was a topic that when I was at NICOM was gone over pretty thoroughly, even to the extent of when you wanted to, treat staff to lunch, is really not technically something that you're supposed to do with taxpayer dollars. You can, if there's a training and you're mandating it and they have to work through lunch, then provide lunch. But some of the liberties with travel and entertainment that are commonplace in the workforce are not commonplace in municipal government.
I'm just curious if our treasurer has comments on that, just because you worked for the state, and I wonder if you have a perspective. Spotlight on Tom Warren.
Well, first, I'm glad I was called back up because Dale is watching from home and sent me a correction that of that $8,000 for professional dues and meetings when we had met to work on the budget, it was intended that each trustee had $2,000 for their professional dues and meetings. That was the intent, but budget-wise.
So it's 2 times 4 is 8.
Yes, yes. As far as the question about what the state controller guidance is, I looked at and read what Stuart had written, and a lot of it was very familiar to me because when I worked for the Comptroller's Office auditing local governments, the whole idea was that, aside from having to benefit the municipality, it really wasn't supposed to be like personal. And, I understand needing to talk to constituents or other local officials and have meetings and such. I'll agree they're generally nominal amounts, so it doesn't really bother me. I'm willing to work within the framework of the village and the policies and such. The board needs to set the policy. You get advice from Corporation Counsel, but I think at the end of the day, the board establishes policy.
Right. So the word personal is just a little tricky. So when I meet with constituents about village issues, anywhere from complaints about things and people, which are confidential, so they want to meet with me. I mean, that's what I do, right? I represent the public. To, we have some great ideas we'd like to discuss with you. To, could you tell us about whatever? They're all village business. My Saturdays at 2 o'clock. This with constituent is not a personal thing. It is totally a business on behalf of the village. Both from an education point of view, as a resource, I mean, that, so I just want to take the word personal right out of that, and I think you understand that. But because we're on record, I just want to make it clear what it's for. So it sounds to me, unbeknownst to me all these years, that we have a budget, or that we set a policy for how much we have to do what we need to do to carry business. Well, I was not even aware that I had $2,000 per trust. Not me personally, that's a bucket of 2 times 4, and I guess you have a separate for all of that. Okay, so it doesn't read like that in here. It reads like that when I read this, and I keep saying I as if I'm the only person that's on top of this thing, but when we read it, the tone of it was very much having to receive permission to use the money in advance of spending, because it's written like that throughout. It's difficult to do that.
The intention was for permission, because that's what the state requires.
That's not what the controller is actually, though, saying. We set the policy.
No. With all due respect, you do set the policy, but you have to be guided by how you spend the money. And you don't have essentially a carte blanche to just spend the money, even if there's $2,000 in the budget. There has to be a certain responsibility based upon what the controller has. That's my position.
I don't know if I'm in support of that, actually. Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate the position, but that's not the way I would see the concept of setting policy on what we want to spend. And I don't necessarily, while it's your advice, I just don't believe that that's the intent, that trustees who do not report to a certain part of the organization, who have supervisory roles, when discussing something in public, mostly for me, because this is a part-time gig, and there's a certain amount of principle involved here, and this is not just setting policy for us, because I think in the 4 or 5 years I've handed in about $60 over 6 years. I pay for everything, but that's not maybe what the next trustee should be doing, because the next trustee may not have the finances to be meeting with constituents on their own time. And want to do that.
So the position of the state is that a meeting with a constituent does not necessarily, if it has to require a meal, because that is the only time you can do it, or you're traveling. The position of the state is that meeting with anybody does not necessarily require a meal. So, and again, this is what I learned my first month when going to NICOM. So it is very different, because that's not what I was used to in the private sector. The idea of setting policy is not to, the policy basically details what expenses are approved. That's all preset in the policy. As long as everybody's applying, adhering to that policy, the reason that it's centered in the staff is not so that the staff has control over what and when the trustees do things, but more to make sure that an expense that was not in the policy is would be approved. So if just say, and I know it wouldn't happen here, but somebody decided that they were doing business in Disney World and their business involved their children and tickets to Disneyland, that expense would come through and it would not be approved by the manager or the treasurer. So it's not so much that if board members want to take a certain trip and we've budgeted for it and within the policy it is in the best interest of the village, that's not subject to conditional approval. That's will be an approved reason and legitimate reason to use those funds. It's more to protect from people misuse it. The way it's written and the way it's written to centralize it on the staff side is just to make sure that the policy is administered, whether it's trustees, whether it's department heads, whether it's the manager, whoever it is, that everybody's following the same guidelines for what is an approved expense. Those things can be discussed at the board level and how that policy is written, the amounts that you're putting towards that, the way you're looking, judging travel, those things can be written, but there are best practices, guidelines, and pretty strict implications from the controller's office of what is really considered a tax, because again, it's not a corporation's money, it's not a nonprofit donor's money, it's tax money. So it's a much more literal, much more narrow idea of what constitutes a travel expense or an there is really no entertainment expense. So.
Okay, so it's March. And this was originally in our reorg meeting, and we've had some back and forth and wanted to discuss it, and it's taken us a little while to get at least to this point. And I still think that we're not all on the same page. So I guess my first question is, are we just operating under the 2019 guidelines that were passed last year?
You are.
Okay, that's fine. It worked in 2019. Well, actually, that's the thing. It didn't work.
You
in
wanted to
2019.
change the conference.
So,
right?
well, there's
We had an
that-
issue.
what we want to do is, I think right now we have a board full of adults that want to be responsible and are not trying to throw away taxpayer dollars. And we have a manager who knows how to do her job and is not going to be bullied into paying for things that are inappropriate. So I'm not actually worried about having rules in place for anybody sitting at this table in this room right now. But we have a responsibility to look out for the taxpayers for generations to come. And what I was trying to find is because there have been a few emails that have gone back and forth.
Yeah, I know,
And you
it's
keep
getting
referencing the best practices and guidelines from the controller and from NICOM. Maybe if you could send, and Stuart, I know you have gone to great lengths to give us quotes but you've given us excerpts and quotes for this municipality and that municipality. Is there, I mean, I can look at the NICOM website myself if that's where you're drawing it from. But
No, I'm getting it from the Travel and Conference Expense Management. That's the controller's report. That was in my memo that I sent to all you folks.
okay,
Yeah, that's there. If you want that actual document, which is about 35
no,
pages.
I mean, is that?
Is that this?
Nope. I mean, I'll be happy to send it to you. That's about a 30-page document. I can send it to you if you want to read it.
Oh, that's why. It's a 30-page document.
Oh, so we don't have what you gave you pulled excerpts from it okay.
That's why. So it's
but
a little hard to follow, yeah.
Yeah, because you keep referring to something, and I just don't know what it is that we're referring to. So, other than the emails.
Apologize, I didn't know anyone. If you wanted the full policy, I'll be
Well,
happy to
I feel
send
like
it.
we're not all seeing it the same way. So I'd like for us to all be looking at the same recommendations, and so we can all come to a conclusion.
Yeah,
that-
because the words best practices, while I enjoy, are really, it's like an adjective for a whole bunch of things. There's lots of best practices by lots of people about lots of things, about the same topic. And so it's okay to say, it's just, Like,
in
you
this
know.
case, though, the controller's office takes a very conservative view on what is a legitimate expense for meals, and meals are again, in the context of travel. Meal reimbursement really doesn't exist in that world with some certain exceptions. And that was a learning experience for me as well. But that
Actually, I
is-
just realized something I signed a long time ago. So when staff works late, they get a meal, right? Because I've seen vouchers for that, not in the past year.
So
The last time I did
so
vouchers.
if you have a team working overtime on a water main break,
Mm-hmm.
we will feed them, yes.
Or a
That
big
will be
snowstorm, or- yeah.
snowstorm, things like that. If Maddie or I decide to stay late because we have work to do, you will not see an expense for that.
Right.
So,
That's why I rejected those vouchers.
I just
but-
actually,
Especially for you.
I actually remember a number of vouchers. It was the group before us, so the trustees before us, before you, I guess. One of the reasons I got the answer of why we were supposed to sign vouchers is because there was a lot of that. And it wasn't clear, actually, because those aren't travel expenses either, actually.
it would be when staff is it's necessary
Okay.
for staff to work
I
because
remember
of an emergency or an overtime situation that requires them to work through a mealtime.
Right. So the other category, were you going to say? Oh, no. Because we all looked at this. I mean, as you could see, there's lots of colors. So the other category was the conferences, right? So we do budgets which I think was your biggest point, actually.
Well, that was where
That's where you were
there
going
was
to.
a history of a problem that we want to make sure
From last
never
year.
happens again.
Right. So do you want me to continue? Or? Okay.
Okay,
I'm happy to continue. It's
No,
fine.
we can specifically talk about that, and we've talked about it, but for anybody
Right.
following along at home, there are certain conferences that we go to that are hosted in the region. They're held by organizations that we're likely a member of, whether it's Pattern for Progress, or it's the Pace Land Use Law
NICOM.
Center, or it's NICOM, and there's no question, any of us that can make the time to go, we know those are trusted places for us to go, and those are, routinely signed up for. Nobody questions if that's something that should be approved. Then there are sometimes opportunities, like, for example, we have someone on our board right now who's a firefighter. There might be some place where his years as a firefighter, we could take advantage of that. And he may want to attend a conference we've never heard of before because it's been years since we've had anybody with that expertise and interest. But maybe we should take advantage of that person who's willing to give the time and has that expertise. And then if the village board can review it and say, that makes a lot of sense, let's spend some of our conference money for that this year, that's going to be a benefit to the community long-term, great. But it's not an organization where we would routinely be sending someone. We could have somebody who's got an incredible pedigree in environmentalism, and they want to go to an environmental conference in Massachusetts, and it's going to be really valuable to us in our updating of our comprehensive plan, or anything else we might be doing. We have a lot of, those are the types of things that we want to be able to say, yeah, that's an unusual request, but gosh, it makes a lot of sense. We want to approve that, and we want to be able to have that conversation on a board level.
Correct.
And then we also want to make sure that someone doesn't suggest, hey, I want to go to a conference, and if we haven't had an opportunity to review it, maybe that conference wasn't so appropriate for using taxpayer dollars to send somebody to. Maybe it was politically partisan. Maybe it was really just an inappropriate use of public funds. We want to prevent that from ever happening. So that's something that we definitely have to make sure that the guidelines are there for it, and I do want that to be at a board level. I don't want that to be put in the hands of a manager, because the manager is subordinate staff, and I don't want one trustee putting a manager in a position of approving something that the public may never find out about. So that's part of why I think that needs to be
Yeah,
figured
that
into the
piece,
policy right now.
I think almost started this actual
Yes, it did.
conversation.
Yes.
Right.
So I don't know if we feel
And-
that piece is
Not really feeling it's
not here.
addressed. No.
That's a part that I don't think is clear on my end. Obviously there's a portion in here that says private written requirement where we have to submit a form to either the treasurer and to the village manager, to get permission to do anything in here and to obtain a village
Well, you would be
credit card. So in things of that, to me, I want to make sure that it's very specific, very clear. Like I said, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, it's definitely going to be a different board, different members sitting in here, and I don't want taxpayers paying for something that they should not.
Right.
It's very simple. I mean, and Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the time that I've been sitting in this chair, I think I did one reimbursement, and that's because I didn't have a village credit card when I went to a NICOM conference, and that was the only time that I ever used that. Because I think funds like that should not be, take advantage of it.
Right.
So I think I want to make sure that it's very clear and very detailed, and that I believe that was the understanding among ourselves was, maybe we should have a different policy just for us.
Yeah, I think that started actually the
That's the whole
conversation.
thing, because, we do a lot of the
The
stuff.
challenge there is, again, if it's not the people here with incredible amount of integrity, then you're allowing a process where a different board can say something else. And
Yeah.
that's where you're going to get into a problem.
Well,
And then if you don't have the treasurer, so also in any organization, the treasurer, the manager, the CEO has fiduciary responsibility. So if there's something that's not, a board of directors, even in a subservient, a subordinate position, you still have to be able to raise the flag. So that's the idea of having one policy. Because at the end of the day, if the board decides on a policy that is in conflict or the staff feels uncomfortable with, it's a fiduciary responsibility to raise that flag. Otherwise, if the board gets in trouble, so do the people who approve those things. So that's a liability.
I hear you. I wasn't necessarily suggesting, the manager still has an administrative role, whatever, to process all of this. So that would be a check.
What I'm saying is if you have two different policies, you've now allowed the board to create a policy, that's almost, you're giving a board an opportunity to create a policy that then is different from that of the staff. So it makes, I'm not sure I would understand why that would be necessary if you're making, because I'm just not understanding the need for two different policies, because it's never an issue that if you do the policy and the language in the controller's office is good. It covers many of these things. If you have that policy, it is a policy. The board can set the budget. The board can determine travel, and the board can say, well, this conference in another, state that is a bit more expensive is really going to be valuable. And as long as it passes all that, then you're going to go. No, the manager's not going to say no to that if it's in the budget and everything else. So I think we're taking the control is really based on the board setting a policy that then is for everyone. Having two different policies as a fiduciary makes me very concerned. I don't see any reason for that if the policy is written the way it's supposed to be written. None of the staff is traveling without board approval, necessarily, if
That's
their
not
board.
true.
We have no
That's
idea
not
when the
true.
staff goes on trips.
Yes, and we don't
that's
actually get asked. So who do you go to when you want to travel somewhere
I don't
that's
get
out
to
of state?
travel that much, so,
No,
I mean,
but-
actually,
Well, we
you
don't-
have
we
all
don't
asked me
do
to tell,
this.
you have all asked me since I've been here to have that approved by you, so.
Again,
so-
we don't spend very much money of our own either, and even if we do, we don't
So,
submit it.
but
So
what I'm
that's not
saying is-
actually the point.
So
There's a
what I'm
point you're
saying-
making about policy, right? So it is not accurate that the board gets asked by their direct reports when they go to conferences whether they should go or not. That is actually not the way it works, whether it should or not. I don't think we've ever
But
been
the
asked.
idea is if
We
you were
budget
to.
for stuff, though.
But if you, the reason it's written that way, so if everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's really more of a cursory, I'm going to this, it's a moot point. The reason it's written like that is if somebody abuses it, then, because if everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and everybody's within budget, there is absolutely no reason why something wouldn't get approved. Because the policy is the approval. So you've set the policy, this is what you can do, and this is the budget. So as long as you're within the policy and within the budget, that is the essentially approval. So I think that we're getting hung up on where it would be a situation where, for some other reason, a manager you'd have to vet it with the manager first. I don't really think that that's what the intent is. I think the intent is for the board to set the policy. There has to be a mechanism, however, for staff or anybody, the treasurer to say, hey, wait a second, you went on this trip, and by the way, it does not meet the criteria, and we're not paying for that. There has to be. That has to be. You do not want to give that away. Yeah.
I'm not actually suggesting that we should.
We're on the other, like, it's
It's
not clear.
not understanding why there would be. I'm just having a hard time understanding.
Because it happened. Yeah. Twice. So, I mean, it did happen, and the village board did a bad job at curtailing it, and then, it went through,
have
there
my
was some
thoughts
transition happening in the manager's office, and it got paid, and it shouldn't have, and I don't want it to happen
But
again.
I think, to be honest, that could potentially happen again, whether or not you have two policies in the same situation.
I'm not so concerned about if it's two policies or if it's a section of the
Right.
policy that outlines it more clearly. I think if
that's the piece.
If
I think
that's
that-
what we're,
Yeah, I think it's one policy with more of a safeguard against preventing something like that in the.
If
we've
that's the
solved
hangup, then I
problem.
think we can find
Yeah,
a
we
way
can
to
work-
address
Yeah.
all of the concerns.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly
Okay.
right.
Okay. So we're not ready to move this forward yet. That's what I'm hearing.
But we're doing our
We
due
did
diligence.
vet a lot of the concerns tonight. We are,
And we're doing our due diligence
Omar, do you have any-
and acting responsibly.
Any additional?
You've got notes over there.
Yeah, so I mean, my general feelings about this are that the way that I understand it, this is part of the reorganization meeting at the beginning of the year. So every year, in the first meeting, the board sets what the policy is. And what we're trying to do is respond to something that we saw in the past by changing the language here, right? The trouble that I have is that while I generally understand what happened, I wasn't there. I don't fully understand it. And that's also not on the table again to happen. And so I feel generally agnostic to how we change it to solve a problem that isn't on the table anymore, because if that's not on the table, then let's look forward to let's let future boards have to deal with in their own reorganization. Okay, given where who's on the board and kind of what's going on, let's change it to reflect the facts on the ground. So my point is this. So like being reactive, right, in that way, I'm generally agnostic to, because it seems to me like these policies are written in a way that are bigger than the village itself. You take the state recommendations from the control that Stuart is alluding to. To me, like that makes sense. To me, it's like sexual harassment, as an example. It's something that I've brought up in past meetings. Like, we are all subjected to, as village employees, a sexual harassment policy. We are not village employees in the way that village employees are, but we are subjected to those rules. So we're like in that weird place where we as a board can't say, well, we're going to have like a different sexual harassment policy for us. We fall under that thing. This is weird because we're trying to solve a problem. And I think that we can, it sounds like, with a subsection of or whatever, like that makes sense. We'll be able to figure that out. But I don't know. That's what it's tough for me, because we can go through all of this, we can settle this language, and this is real slippery. Like the next board will, to me, this is not solving the issue of people abusing power. Because if you want to do that, you'll figure out a way. That's how I feel. Your thoughts?
Well, it would, because we saw it go very badly, it would be irresponsible for us to not do our best to prevent it in the future, while we have 5 people that don't want to abuse the system trying to figure out how to do it better.
So perhaps that speaks to the policy needing to be a little bit more detailed in certain areas, because I think that there maybe was a perception of grayness at the time. It was during the time of a lot of transition, and, you know, things happen. I don't think anybody deliberately was trying to, you know, do anything they thought was inappropriate, but I do think that the learning from that is we could be a little bit, maybe a tad more descriptive in the type of things that are approved for traveling and you know, and again, I do think that the Comptroller's Office offers a lot of good language in that's pretty direct. There are other considerations that you could do, because sometimes there are events where actually there may be other resources or scholarships. You could consider saying, you know, under certain circumstances, if there are alternative ways of paying for something, those should be explored first for certain types of things, as was, I believe, the case. So, you know, I think there's things that you could put in to make something that's been maybe subject to interpretation a little bit more concrete.
I think that's our responsibility as a village board, because we do create the policies, correct? And I always kind of go back to something that I'm more familiar with than anything else, which is the building code. You know, we have the guidelines of the building code, and we here in the village have areas where we have taken the village code to be more strict than anything else. So to me, taking this policy of the controller, I don't want to just copy what the controller said, but I want to make sure, because an incident happened, I don't want that same incident to happen in the future. So I want to make sure that that policy is more strict
I
than
think there
what
are
the
other
controllers
things that
are.
we
So
can
I
do in
think
terms
that
of
part-
process that could really ensure that that would, you know, something would not happen like that again. I have some
But in
other
the- you know-
thoughts to how we can do that in process as well.
So within that, within the same vein, obviously, is like situations like that, like, you know, the mayor was alluded before in, you know, conference and things of that nature, that part, it has to be this level, the village board level conversation and part of the work session. If he knows that he's thinking of going to this conference, you know, we can bring that up here. If I wanted to go to a conference, you know, that's related to architectural, that I think will be beneficial for the village, I want to bring it here. You know, I may be going anywhere regardless, you know, but, you know, I'm just putting examples down on the table, not that I will ever have the people of the village of Washington pay for anything that I do in that regards, but, you know,
Right.
situations like that may have come up.
So one of the things with conferences too is because they're for public benefit, then they should be communicated as such. So for all conferences that people participate in, there should be a reporting function of that as well, which is another way to ensure transparency and that people do know, because whether it's staff or whether it's board level, if somebody gets to go to a conference that not everybody can go to for a variety of reasons, and it's for the benefit of the village, if that communication is never disseminated in any way, then one could argue maybe it wasn't that as beneficial as it could be. So reporting is another way that we can ensure that there's whatever value comes from a conference is really taken back to the organization and communicated. So that could be in the form of a board report. It could be in the form of many different things. But I think mostly reporting back at a work session on this is the conference I attended and this is why. It can be done in staff, depending on the nature of the, you know, I don't know if everything rises to that level, but depending on the nature, nobody should be going on a conference and then not having anything to show for it when they get back. I don't care how good the conference was.
Agreed. Is that something that you think should be included in the guidelines and the policy?
You know, again, I think the challenge with policy is you make them too prescriptive and they get, you know, that becomes problematic, and you make them too loose. I think that we have to look at both policy and practice. So there could be processes that are put in place that we also have in conjunction with it, so that more than one eye, you know, more than one set of eyes is looking at something for its value. And then that way you have a little bit of a checks and balances built into the actual process of making sure that and that can be done, you know, the board can, I think, to Mandy's point, if you have a discussion at a work session about possible things that they want to do, I think it would be very, very hard to have that discussion and do something that wasn't appropriate.
Okay, so let's put this back on the agenda, or 2 weeks from now. And we'll take a look at, and
nobody's
we've now
traveling now
asked them-
anyway because we can't, so we're just going to be,
No, that trip
Yeah.
to Italy is not happening.
no.
All right. So now we have 30 pages of guidelines to read through. We have homework to do.
We will,
How excited Manny is.
Oh, he is.
so,
I can't get an audiobook of this.
So next up, I don't think this will take very long, but it's kind of fun, and I would like
This is making
to
me crazy. Change the clock.
acknowledge Nancy Carmichael, who tagged me in a Facebook post and alerted me to something called Citizens Academy of Longboat Key, Florida. And wouldn't it be great if we could do something like that here in, here, just, Maddie, I forgot to give a store one, so just toss me one. So anyway, what we were, so we thought this would be kind of a good idea, and because there's so much interest in local government, and we know we have a very engaged community here, and we do want to be transparent, and we do want to hear from people, this would be a kind of fun, interactive way of engaging with the community. And what it would involve is different sessions over the course of maybe 6 to 8 weeks, or we can time it different ways, where each week somebody would, we'd have a department talk about their function and the role in municipal government, what they're doing in Ossining. We'd really be able to dimensionalize how village government works. It would also be able to help people really understand the budgeting process more thoroughly, where their taxpayer dollars are going. And it would be able to keep us all a little bit more engaged about the many, 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 many different functions that are happening every day, and how how our citizens can be more involved in the process. So I've outlined just a few things sort of for, wanting to make it fun and engaging, but and I did follow the Longboat Key agenda somewhat, but session 1 can be a brief history of Ossining. We can talk about, I put here a tale of 2 cities, or in this case, 1 town and 2 villages, the organization of the town of Ossining, and why it is like that, because it is sometimes very hard to understand that.
Maybe someone can explain it to us.
Yeah, so we could talk about the village charter and code, which Corporation Council here is decidedly the expert, and as well as clerk functions, elections, records, and meetings. Session 2, what we know for certain, your taxes. So our tax assessor, our receiver, our treasurer, and our IT director can all talk about your taxes at work, the budgeting process, and making sure everything's working here. Some of our online capabilities to do tax payments, things like that. Again, Public Works would be really great. This could be done at the Ops Center, so that you could really take a walk around and see the garage and, meet
Touch a truck?
everybody. And yeah,
Touch a
you
truck for
could
grown-ups?
touch a truck for grown-ups.
Yes, with gloves
But I
on,
think it would
yes.
be good. And that one, if we could do that
See
one
you
during
all
the
over this.
during the day, that would be a really great thing. And I think that this can be also, for some of these things where we get other staff involved, that's like a really nice point of employee engagement. So again, water treatment plant, there may be some issues right now with touring the plant, but we might be able to arrange something like that too. Parks and Rec, who doesn't love Parks and Rec? So a lot of things that we could be talking about at the community center, and a facilities tour, and some sort of really great slide presentation on all our town and village parks, and all the things you can do here, all the types of events that Rec puts on. And again, we have our planning and building department, and then we have our trio of O's. So we've decided O is not only for Ossining, but it's for out of harm's way, and that would be the OPD, the OFD, and OVAC, talking about how they keep the community safe. So, this is to get your input. Obviously, this is just an outline. We can do it differently. I was going to put dates in this, and I was thinking late spring. I'm not putting dates in it.
No, don't put dates.
So right now,
No, because right now nobody's allowed to be in a room together. Yeah.
so right now, we could do it also in the fall. You know, as soon as you know, we don't have a global pandemic in the way. This is something I've talked to all the staff about. I've talked to the fire department. I have vetted this with them. They know this. We've talked about it, and everybody was enthusiastic about it and on board with doing it. And we would try to do a combination of daytime, evening, and maybe a Saturday meeting too, so that we can get different people to come.
How long is each session?
About 2 hours.
And people, it would be free to the public, but they'd have to register or something? Is that what you're thinking?
You know, it would be free to the public, and we try to do something where they could register, especially if we were doing a tour. Like, I think we'd have to have registration in advance to go to the water treatment plant or something like that. But for other ones, it could be, you know, I mean, yes, and we certainly
Well,
would
I
not
assume
charge
that-
admission. so-
I assume that's why you were saying either Village Hall
Thought it
or the
was a
library,
revenue
depending on how
stream.
big a group it was gonna
Yeah,
be.
and yeah, so just exactly. So if we thought it was going to be a bit bigger group, we could do it somewhere else, or you know, sometimes it's nicer to do something in the library. This room is, you know, we could set it
Awful.
up differently too. Yeah, depends on when we
We'll see.
new tables and things. But we thought this was. Everybody sort of was on board with this and liked the idea, and it would give a lot of opportunity to talk about things. And this wouldn't be in the context of a board meeting. It would just be a public meeting, and people could go and they could ask questions, and there we wouldn't necessarily have a buzzer, or there wouldn't be rules about, you know, it really would be an opportunity to just educate the public so they better understand what it is we do, and so we can be educated in the process as well.
Go ahead.
So, I'm actually very supportive of this.
Say, actually, as if we would expect anything else.
No. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we actually had a partial conversation about this last year or the year before, when 4 of us attended down to an ICOM conference.
Oh, they talked about this. That's where I've heard this
They
before.
talked about that,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, it
and
is a
there
thing.
was
Yeah, it was upstate,
engagement.
they did
Talking
one,
about,
yeah.
that's
Mhm.
right.
So and it was upstate,
Man,
and
what a
and-
memory, man.
It was the soap people, right?
Yes.
Ah, that's right. There we are. It's all coming
That's
together.
what it was. It was the engagement. How
Yeah,
do you
we saw it,
engage? in-
but did we bring it back and set it up? No, you guys brought it back and set it up. Thank you, Nancy Carmichael and Karen.
No, we actually did have a conversation as a part of the
No, we
work
did actually
session.
talk about this.
Yeah.
And you know,
But
the
we got
village
busy with other
manager-
things.
We didn't have
At that
Karen on
time.
board then, so
Correct.
thank you, Karen. You
So,
made it
so
happen.
again, so I'm very supportive of this because I think that's something that
Yeah.
you know, it will benefit the public in total different areas. And especially, I remember it was one of the treasurers of that municipality who actually started this. And he actually enjoyed teaching the community part of the process and how the budget works. Because a lot of people
And what
don't.
does he do now?
Who's that?
The guy now is a consultant,
He's a consultant,
setting up
actually,
these
setting up all
things.
this stuff, yes.
It's
So-
amazing how we all heard the same thing and how we remember it in
What
such
pieces of
different
it
ways.
resonated, yes.
So, yes, correct.
We're-
But,
we wouldn't
you
have
know,
to
I
hire a
think-
consultant. We
No,
could-
no.
He worked for the
He
municipality at
worked
the
for the
time,
municipality at the
and then
time.
he suddenly found a new career.
Oh, okay.
No,
Probably more
no,
lucrative.
no. Actually, it was so well received, was my point.
Yes.
That people had asked him to do it for their municipalities because maybe they didn't have the people. I always want to say manpower, but I don't want to say that people power. So he actually does this now. That's how successful. That was the point of that.
So, you know, so yes.
Good to know.
Definitely.
Karen may be looking for a new job. We got to be careful here. Let's not start a rumor.
So
No,
no,
remember,
and I
this is
think
great.
this
Yeah.
is very
This is good.
definitely something cool. Even like
Yeah.
for students, for high school students, that sometimes you know they like government, they want to be involved in things of that. You know, I think it's very helpful.
Yeah.
And just maybe keep the young community to
Yeah.
get more involved and actually see what this means. You know, for them as well. So thank you.
So this, I really like it. I always have a little issue with the word Citizens Academy, so I'm sure we'll change it to our own little wonderful Austining
actu-
name.
Yeah, that
Oh,
was,
you
that-
like
no,
it?
No, I circled that on mine too.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Only because citizenship is
Yeah.
is such a loaded word, and I don't have a suggestion of what's a better word, but.
It is like not just Longboat Key, like there's many.
It's actually a term for
citizen-
the
yeah.
academy. I
Yeah.
know, that's the
But
thing.
we can, this is a working title. This
Oh,
is
no.
just-
I just don't have a suggestion of what's better, but I'm not comfortable with this,
I
and
think
that's like the tiniest little critique.
Academy us.
I think that Maddie is gonna copyright a special Ossining name for this academy. There we go. Okay, anyway, that's not the big issue. So I think this is great. It's probably I remember he was talking about the sessions, and then there were some sessions, it's all coming back, there were some sessions where really too many people almost showed up. So they started breaking, like, they had, like, this is a limit, and if we get that wait list, so just be prepared, like, there's certain topics. First of all, do you know that my favorite tour of this entire village is the water plant? Seriously, I think that
Well,
tour is...
Once you go to the water plant, it's kind of cool.
It's really cool, and I have a personal affinity for it because I think it actually can show people who have no idea about how important water is and a bunch of other things that goes on in villages and what great careers you can actually have from it all over the world. And so I really wish everybody that we would just do this as and here's my engineer daughter who did that tour calling me. So that's really cool. I would like to add, but I know 8 is a lot. Because let's say you do once a month and you want to take tours in, let's say, the park or whatever, you know, all of a sudden, you know, it's once a month, it's 8 months, you know, you got
Well,
budgets
this was
of 2
done
months.
over weeks, so, you know.
Oh,
it
I
was not
know.
Like, you know, so we'd have to look at that, and that was,
This
and I
is
wanted
great.
input from you.
Well,
and we
I'm
could certainly
almost like
different-
saying this is my input, more than just like I'm in
Yeah.
support of it. I could have stopped with I'm in support of it, go get them, but I now remember the conversation. So videotaping some of the stuff so that people can then look
Yes.
at it, who may be homebound and maybe can't do a tour of something. I don't think that you're supposed to do videotape tours of things like water plants and certain
that we
government.
could not do.
Right, but, you know, I mean, there's a lot of fun things. There were discussions that he had, I'm just giving you now, because I'm like definitely in support now, I'm adding to it, is, you know, if you want to include kids, right? Like you have a camp in the summer and you want to do a tour with the kids, a little hunt. I would say that whoever gets, like, if you put tests at the end, and the person who scores can run for mayor. Because if they could figure out the town and the village, let's make that a priority. But I think like the whole town-village conversation, people would really, the thing that's missing for me here, and I had actually asked him, and now I gotta go through my notes, because I wrote his name somewhere, and now it's all coming back to me, is, so we have, you know, my thing about having residents who sit on committees and volunteers, and the importance of those dozen committees, not really in here. So the part they play is advisory, so the land use, which is a direct with responsibility. So I went last night to something, I've watched them on video. I would say that the number one issue for me with the boards, both its members and people who, in the public, is that there's a lack of understanding what those boards are actually supposed to do. I'm not talking about individuals, I'm not talking
Right,
about whether
right, right.
people are happy, I'm not talking, that there's a lack of actual understanding of what they're
That's a good
supposed to
idea,
do.
because that is
And
an
that might
important
be a
government
nice session.
function.
Yeah.
So we could
Advisory
definitely,
to both the electeds and advisory to both.
and how they communicate the process and everything, which is
Well,
hard
I'm
to
convinced that if
understand.
people see that you might get 10 more people who might be seriously interested in maybe participating more and have some ideas, which might be very productive for our democratic process. That might be a nice outcome of it. So I would just add that in. I don't know if that's a 9th session or. And I'm very happy if we had to go to Longboat Key to see if it works.
Is
It
that-
was a
so we all
policy.
agree that that's okay, that's
That's okay.
a beneficial trip. Okay,
It's a
so
nice
there we go.
community.
So,
I'm sure that's in compliance with the comptroller's
Yes.
guidelines.
No, but actually, he did this because it was at NICOM. So this was actually a town in upstate New York that was very successful. I just don't remember the town.
Thank you, Karen. I agree with the rest of the folks. This is a great idea. Some of the thoughts that I have, one is what kind of considerations we would have for language, whether we would have an interpreter there, do certain ones of these in Spanish, like have a Spanish version, whatever would make sense for them. That's number one. Number two, I love the idea of taping them. I would like to elevate it even more. I think what would really excite me was to see, if you go on our village website, if you could, what would almost be like, either like the most basic level would be just be a series of videos for each one of these.
Right.
But to me, it would be really cool to have almost like if you were taking like an online class or something, where it would say, let's say, a brief history of Ossining, and it would just be the presentation, but then you would have a link to this website, and here's a document, here's a thing. So not only it would be
So linking to other things through.
correct,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah, because that way it would be an evergreen resource for folks that want to learn about Ossining. Number 3, I not only agree with you, Trustee Levin, that the boards should have one of these sections, but in terms of who would be folks that we would encourage to do something like this, I think people who sit on boards, we would encourage them to go through this, because they would learn about what we're all about. Number 4, whatever number I'm up to, we're also working on the comp plan. And so part of the comprehensive plan is going through each part of village life to examine what we want it to look like. And so there may be ways of tying that into this.
Yep.
So
That'd be
that's
cool.
a consideration. And last is this may be above and beyond, but when I think about who are the people that might want to come to something like this but might be limited, 2 of the things that we could partner with people to make available or whatever are childcare and food. Childcare, I think, is tricky for a variety of reasons, but and some of these may lend themselves more to that than others. But food, I also think that it's a double benefit of if in each one of these you can have First Village Coffee sponsors Ossining 101, and they have First Village stuff, and Craven Jamaican, and so forth and so on. Also, great titles. You're welcome. I'm full. Great titles all throughout, except for number 5, Planning for Ossining.
I know.
Not
I know.
enough. Where's the creative
know.
juice? But the rest, I
know.
love. They're
kinda-
great. They're
look,
great titles.
I went back and forth on a couple things, and then I just was like, I punted. What can I tell you?
You know, you could figure out the timing of some of this, and depends on how you want to do them. You might want to do 1, 2, and 3 and do the sequence, and do that in 2 languages in the following year, because that's what this guy did. He actually started with a few. He didn't do the whole series. But there's a lot of fun things to do with this, you know.
Absolutely.
Like for kids and their parents, it could be you know, the largest growing population in Westchester is aging at home. So you do an intergenerational something that is interesting. So you're not only educating people, but you're using that moment to also have people interact. So it's not always a fair or this or that, but an actual piece. That would be like almost like beneficial human element that brings government closer to the people, but also humanizes government, so it's not a bureaucracy.
I think that's such an important consideration. And one of the things too, there's a lot of people who work in village government and doing all kinds of really essential jobs and really important jobs, and they're in our community. And I think it's really important to me to be able to acknowledge that work as much as possible. But more so, I think it's important to, you know, to staff to have that recognition, because it's easy to sit here, for me to sit here every week, but, you know, there's a lot of stuff I'm not doing here, like, and there's so much stuff going on that's going on in bad weather, and, you know, different, sometimes unpleasant conditions, sometimes not. But I really want the people who work the hardest and who are really out there and very committed, because one of the things that has really impressed me since I've been here is what a really fabulous staff, like what great group of people, town and village, that just really commit themselves to this every day. And it would be good. I think the public really needs to know how hard people work on their behalf. They really, really do. It's very heartening to see the commitment.
Yep, I think it's great. Agreed.
Villa, I think one more thing that I would add is it would be great to have at least one. Maybe for some of these it makes sense to have more than one. Maybe for some of them it's zero. But what the next step or takeaway is. So if you really liked the history of Ossining, here's the, what was it called? The looking at your family tree. The
The genealogy.
Here's the genealogy thing. Here's the next, how you can take it to the next step. Because if you're the kind of person who would go to this, then you're also the kind of person who would benefit from these other things. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so great feedback. We'll go back and incorporate this, and as soon as we can, we'll start figuring out timing for it. So
Can I just add one? Yeah, can I just
Sure.
add? Because this, I don't like taking credit of some of the stuff. And just kind of brings back to a little bit of what I did a couple years back when I had the planning department, the building department, and at that time was the assessor's office. Actually, we had a sort of like a work session and see how the building department, how you planned, the process of obtaining a building permit and what do you do, that kind of stuff. So that kind of reminds me to what you have in the last one. But, what you guys were talking about, and we do have, the taxation in here, and I think that's something that we should highlight in a lot of the stuff that we have, and because it's true, because a lot of the stuff is tied back to our taxes, and I think that's something essential. So a lot of people, they always ask if I finish my attic or my basement, or if I add to my house, what does that mean for my taxes?
Okay.
Do they go up? So a lot of that, especially for a single family house, or even like making it a two-family house, or adding to that, So I think maybe that's a component that maybe we should tie back into our conversation, and just for people to be aware as well. So
good.
Okay, sorry, I have one more.
Oh
And
my
I'm going to stop
gosh.
after this.
What is happening here tonight?
I'm sorry. So I'm thinking of groups that would really benefit from having their members go through each one of these. And to me, I think of like a sandwich place where you get 10 things on your ticket and you get a
Chicken
free
fry or
sandwich.
concept.
Yeah, something like that. So if you go to all of these, at each one you get a whatever, and then at the end you get a whatever. But I'm thinking of like if somebody's interested in running for office, for them to be able to say, I'm a graduate of the, let's call it Citizens Academy for now, that's the name of it here. I'm the graduate of the Citizens Academy, and you're running for office, like that would mean something, because we know that means you went through each one of these things. Or if you're somebody who is a student and you're like putting it on your college resume, like I went through the Citizens Academy, and that means I learned about my village history and whatever. There's just like a lot of groups that I think would, now that's an extra layer of complication,
that's
but
what
it's
happened to
also
this guy.
a way of marketing to groups and like getting more people.
That's actually what happened to
I
him.
think that's kind of fun,
That's
because I'm
what-
trying to think of like what we could give them, like
A mug.
like a mug, or like, I don't know.
don't we have the
I would,
books?
if I could do one more to append to what was just said, just a thought of bringing people together from a very humanistic point of view. I think that this should be for residents, meeting, I think staff, there's probably some electeds in there, fire department, et cetera. But one of the things that should happen is that staff should go to these sessions. I wouldn't say in the majority, because it becomes a staff meeting, right? Or all the politicians show up. That's a political thing. But let us just say that there's 30 openings for a tour. As an example, I would say that 4 staff members or some number should be invited, because first staff meeting the public, not on the front of the room, but as part of the audience and part of the group, I think is really very healthy. A certain friendliness, a certain humanistic environment. Staff also, I would think, would feel involved and included, and some of our staff obviously does live in the village and or in the town, right? So like looking at that and inviting, you were saying groups, I'm looking at other groups, like maybe there should be like a slate for 2 firefighters, or, like just to bring groups internal together, but not in their official function. So you could be from the water to work with water, but you're going to Parks and Rec just as a thing to learn about. So I think that might be enjoyable. Very excited by this whole thing.
Great. I think you probably got even more feedback than you anticipated, and all of it
No, I
positive.
anticipated a lot.
This
And
is
if we're
fun.
making this sort of some sort of a certification program now, we have to be
Get credits, 4
Let us
credits.
copy
Is
that.
that what you
mindful
said?
of just how cute a title you come up with, Maddie. Don't make the title too cute, because then it doesn't look so good on a college application, so.
Semi-official.
Somewhat semi-professional, yes,
I
but
want an academy jacket, so when people graduate, they get
Yes.
that nice khaki jacket with the big emblem that
right,
says
but not too
something academy.
Hogwarts, so we'll find something that is
I want this
municipally appropriate.
copyrighted.
All right, so do we have a last-minute addition to our agenda? Are we discussing this?
This, right?
Oh, is that exact?
No, because,
Yeah, well,
no, not.
Can it be exact?
it could be exact.
Okay. All right, is that the real, I also have a small personnel thing, so I want to do motion to adjourn to executive session for matters of personnel and real property.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. At least 3 ayes, okay. And with that, thank you very much for joining us. Join us next week, March 18th. We will be down at the Birdsall Fagan Police Port Facility for our regular legislative session. This meeting is adjourned to exec.